Welcome, dear viewers. Before we begin, kindly subscribe for more true stories. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and how your day has been. Now settle in. This one's unforgettable. They laughed when I opened the box, said it was just a joke. A pink dog collar engraved with my name. That was the night something in me went still. Not angry, not hurt, just quiet. The kind of quiet before a storm. You think you know the moment everything changes. But trust me, you don't. Not until you've watched them flinch when you finally stop smiling. They didn't even wrap it. It came in a clear plastic bag with a red sticker that read XS for dogs under 20 pounds. The tag dangling from the collar was bone-shaped, pink, engraved in a bubbly font. Property of the Johnsons, Grandma Edition. I held it between my fingers like it might bite me. Danny, the ever-charming daughter-in-law, snorted into her mimosa. "It's just a joke, Helen. Come on, you have to admit it's hilarious." I didn't smile, not even out of politeness. Greg, my son, gave a weak chuckle, the kind that smells of cowardice and cheap beer. He raised his hands, palms out, as if already deflecting blame. "Danny found it online," he said. "You're always saying we treat you like part of the furniture. We thought you'd get a kick out of it, part of the furniture." They loved that line. Danny used it like seasoning, sprinkled over casual cruelty. She'd say it to her friends when I was 3 feet away, elbow deep in dishes. "Oh, Helen's fine. She just blends into the background, like a comfy old armchair," and they would all laugh, sip wine, and never look at me again that night. I placed the collar on the table and stood up. My hands didn't shake. That would have pleased them, validated their little joke. Instead, I poured myself a cup of decaf and took it black. No one said thank you. No one even looked up. It wasn't the collar that broke me. It was the sum of everything that came before it. Like the time I canceled my own dental surgery because Danny had a business trip and no one else could take the kids, or when Greg asked me to co-sign a refinance loan on the house just for the paperwork, then used my name to open a home equity line and never told me. When I brought it up later, he shrugged and said, "Well, it helped all of us, didn't it?" There was the winter I shoveled their walkway during a snowstorm because Greg forgot. And Danny said, "Better you than me. Your schedule's wide open after all." Or the summer they went to Maui for 2 weeks and left me with 3 kids, a list of chores, and their dog, who bit my ankle and pissed on the carpet. When I called Greg about the emergency vet visit, he texted back, "Handle it. We're out on the boat." And it wasn't just the work, it was the erasure. They didn't invite me to family photos unless they needed an extra pair of hands to wrangle toddlers. They didn't consult me on holidays, just sent itineraries. Thanksgiving became pickup day. Christmas gift duty. I bought, wrapped, cooked, cleaned, and was never once in the thank you cards they sent out to friends. But the worst came in whispers. Once, I overheard Danny on the phone say, "She's basically our live-in help, but like free and emotionally resilient." I remember that phrase because I repeated it to myself for weeks, like a mantra for someone else's survival. That night, after the collar, I went to my room. It's not much, just the extension above the garage they call my in-law suite. Funny term. As if I had law or say or presence. It's got a twin bed, a rattling space heater, and a door that doesn't quite close. because the frame is warped from years of ignored water damage. I sat down at my desk, turned on the old brass lamp, and opened the drawer. The folder was there, labeled "If it comes to this." Inside, copies of the mortgage papers with my signature underlined, credit card statements with my name as guarantor, medical bills I'd paid and never been repaid for, a handwritten ledger listing every loan, every unpaid favor, every gaslight I'd swallowed like holy scripture. It wasn't for revenge, it was for clarity, for the record, for me. That collar was the final entry. I wrote it down like the rest. March the 3rd, birthday gift, GPS pet collar, labeled as joke, laughed at, no apology, no shame. I sat still for a long while, staring at the tag on the collar. The plastic shimmered under the lamp, cheap and too bright. I thought of how many times I'd dismissed my own pain, how often I'd said, "They're just tired," or "It's a rough patch," or "At least the kids are sweet." They weren't sweet, not anymore. They mimicked the tone they heard from their mother. They ignored me unless I was useful. One of them called me Alexa once, then laughed when I asked what he meant. I stood up, went to the closet, and pulled down the suitcase. Not to pack, not yet, just to see it. To remind myself that I had options, that I was not, in fact, property. Then I turned off the light, sat on the bed, and let the silence wrap around me. Not the silence of surrender, number. This one was deliberate, calculated. The silence before a plan is made, before the first domino falls. They noticed before I even said a word. It started with the Wi-Fi password. I changed it, just like that. After years of being the silent backbone of their household, I finally took something back, something minor on paper. But nothing's minor when you live in a house powered by convenience. Within minutes, the door to my room creaked open, and Greg stood there, eyebrows raised, phone in hand. "Mom, is the internet down?" I didn't look up from my crossword. Not on my end. He lingered, the way a boy does when caught in the wrong room, but too proud to leave. "Danny's got a call with her team in 15 minutes. I set the pen down deliberately. I'm sure she'll figure it out. She's resourceful. That was the first move. Small, quiet, but a shift in gravity they felt immediately. By noon, Danny was pacing in the kitchen, slamming cabinet doors, calling it a hostile energy. Greg tried to mediate with the grace of a wet sponge. "You know, if there's something wrong, you could just talk to us," he offered. I smiled. "I'm just conserving resources." "You did say I had all the time in the world." The next morning, I removed my name from their Costco membership. That one stung. I watched Greg scroll his app in confusion while standing in front of the registers. Cart full of organic granola and snack packs for the kids. He came home irritated, tossing the receipt on the counter. I couldn't check out. "Do you know how embarrassing that was?" Danny chimed in from across the room, pretending to sip coffee. "You think she's going through something?" Like, mental. They were circling, probing the edges, trying to figure out how the help grew teeth. On Thursday, I took the file from the drawer, "If it comes to this," and brought it with me to the local bank. The young man behind the glass cubicle smiled too brightly and offered me water I didn't take. "I'd like to restructure my accounts," I said. "No joint access. Everything in my name only. No third-party permissions." He blinked twice before catching up. "Of course, ma'am. May I ask?" "No," I said, "but thank you." By the time I returned home, Danny had left a note taped to my bedroom door. "Family dinner tonight. Let's talk." The heart at the end felt like an afterthought from someone who writes LOL while yelling. At dinner, they tried charm. Greg poured me wine. Danny served lasagna. The kids were dressed unusually well, their hair slicked, faces scrubbed clean, like they were props in a forgiveness campaign. "So," Greg said, drawing the syllable out like it had weight, "we thought maybe we could all get on the same page. Just check in." Danny leaned forward, her smile tight. "We've noticed you've been different. Is there something going on? Something we can help with?" I took a sip of wine and let the silence breathe. "I've just been thinking," I said at last, "about value. What it means to give something without getting anything in return." Danny tilted her head, faux concerned. "You know we appreciate you." I set my fork down. "No, I don't." The kids went still. Greg looked at his lap. Danny reached for her wine. "You know," Greg said, "you're always welcome here. But it would help if we could have a little clarity about your intentions." There it was, the word they'd been tiptoeing around. Intentions. I stood up, napkin in hand, and walked to the sink. Rinsed it, folded it, dried my hands. Then I turned. "I intend," I said, "to stop being treated like a couch that occasionally makes dinner." That night, they escalated. I woke to hushed voices outside my door. Greg whispering, Danny sharper, clipped syllables and hurried words. They didn't know I was listening. They never do. "I'm telling you she's up to something," Danny hissed. "She's pulling money. Changing documents." I checked her browser history. She's been looking at housing listings. Greg sighed. "So what? Maybe she's just bluffing. You know how she gets, 'No, I don't.' That's the problem. She used to be predictable." I sat up in bed and smiled into the dark. Predictable. Like a light switch or an old dog. The next morning, Greg made pancakes. I declined. Danny offered me tea. I told her I preferred silence. And in the afternoon, a woman named Linda from Greg's office stopped by, a financial advisor, apparently, who just happened to be offering free consultations to family members. I invited her in, let her sit on the sofa, poured her a glass of water. Then I handed her a copy of the trust document and said, "If you're here to offer guidance, you'll want to read that before you speak." Her eyes skimmed the page, and then widened. Greg and Danny were standing in the hallway, frozen. I turned to them. "I appreciate your concern," I said, "but I'm quite lucid. And no longer available for asset manipulation." I closed the door behind her myself. That evening, I went online and changed the emergency contact on every account I had. Next to each entry, I typed, *, do not contact Gregory Johnson or Danielle Johnson under any circumstances. Legal action pending if violated. And then I slept like a woman with a map. They underestimated how methodical I could be. That morning, while Danny screamed into her phone over a missed Zoom call, "I don't know why the internet's still glitching, ask Greg." I was at the dining table with my laptop, logging into the county assessor's website. The property still had my name on it, half of it anyway. They never bothered to take me off after I co-signed the refinance 5 years ago. probably because they assumed I never would. But assumptions make excellent compost. I opened a new tab and scheduled a consultation with an independent real estate attorney, someone I found through a forum for widows navigating financial independence. Her name was Clarissa, and she spoke to me like a woman who had untied her own knots. "You technically still own part of that home," she said. "You're not a guest." "You're a partner." I liked that word. Not mother, not burden, not helper. Partner. When I got home, the house was suspiciously quiet. Not the kind of quiet that feels peaceful, no. The kind that buzzes with plotting. Greg greeted me in the kitchen, wearing that worn-down high school baseball t-shirt he always pulled out when he wanted to seem harmless. "Hey, Mom," he said casually, like he hadn't tried to install a financial spy in my living room 3 days earlier. "Can we chat?" "Of course," I said, setting down my purse. I always love chats that come with coffee and a sense of dread. He smiled like I'd told a joke. I hadn't. He gestured toward the table. "So Danny and I were talking. We feel like there's been a little tension, and we wanted to make sure you're comfortable here, that you feel included." Ah, inclusion, the corporate word for pretending you care. Danny emerged from the hallway, holding a thin stack of papers and a pen. "We had an idea," she said. "Just something to simplify things for you. It's a power of attorney form, super basic, just in case of emergencies, so we can help manage your accounts if anything happens." She smiled, the smile of a woman who's played Monopoly and always steals from the bank. I didn't take the pen. I took the top sheet and skimmed it silently. They'd even pre-filled the fields. I set it down and looked at them both. "Thank you," I said. "That's thoughtful. Let me think about it." They both relaxed. That night, I took the documents into my room and scanned them for my records. Then I shredded them, slowly. The next day, the school called to ask about a payment delay for the twins' tuition. Apparently, the automatic transfers had stopped. I told them I wasn't involved in that account anymore. Within an hour, Greg burst into my room without knocking. "You canceled the school payments?" "I changed who I support," I said. "Call it reallocation." His voice cracked, just slightly. "You're hurting your grandkids." I stood up. "Don't talk to me about hurt. You let your wife gift me a tracking device for my birthday." You stood there and laughed. He didn't have a response. I walked past him into the hall, where Danny was pacing with her phone, whispering. When she saw me, she hung up fast. "We need to talk," she said. I folded my arms. "Then talk." "I know you've been going to lawyers," she said. "I saw the calendar on your phone. You're planning something, just so you know. Greg's name is on everything too. You can't just take the house." I raised an eyebrow. "I don't want the house. I want the line between mine and yours to be clear. No more blurred boundaries." "That's not how families work," she snapped. I smiled. "You're absolutely right. Families don't work like this." That night, I ordered a new mailbox key, had my own separate P.O. box created, and forwarded all my personal mail. I called my credit card company and removed Greg as an authorized user. When asked for a reason, I said, "security concerns." By Friday, the heat was on. Danny accidentally sent me a voice message meant for her sister. "We might have to go nuclear. She's unraveling everything. If she goes public, Greg could lose his job. He's already on thin ice after the budget stuff." She unsent it within minutes, but not before I saved a backup to the cloud. Later that afternoon, I watched the kids for an hour while they ran errands. When they returned, Greg was visibly tense. Danny barely made eye contact. After dinner, I noticed something strange. My room had been rearranged, not dramatically, just slightly. A file drawer left open, a photo frame nudged out of place. I knew what they were looking for, but the documents weren't here anymore. They were with Clarissa, so I waited until they went to bed, slipped out, and took a cab downtown. I walked into the 24-hour FedEx print center and notarized copies of everything: property records, financial transactions, email threads. Then I mailed one set to myself, certified, another to Clarissa, and one to a friend in Arizona who owed me a favor and kept a fireproof safe, just in case. As I rode the cab back, the driver, a soft-spoken man named Dave, asked if I was visiting family. I looked out the window and said, "No, I'm finally getting out of the doghouse I hosted dinner like it was any other Sunday night. Roast chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, green beans sautéed in olive oil with lemon zest, Danny's favorite. Not that she ever said thank you. I set the table with the good dishes, the ones Greg once told me to just save for Christmas, because in his world, I was a woman made of waiting. Not anymore. Everything gleamed under the dining room light. Candles flickering, a bottle of red breathing near the breadbasket. Even the napkins were cloth, pressed and folded. You would have thought I was announcing a pregnancy, not delivering a reckoning. They came in smiling, cautious. Danny was in a blouse I hadn't seen in years, probably pulled from the back of her closet for serious conversations. Greg kissed my cheek like a politician. The kids flopped into their seats, noses in their phones, until Danny hissed their names and made them put them away. I served, sat, and said grace, which surprised them. I hadn't done that in years. I thanked God for discernment, for strength, and for the ability to see through performance. Danny shifted in her seat. We ate. We made small talk. They didn't ask about my week. They never did. But I volunteered details. I stopped by the county clerk's office on Tuesday, I said, slicing through a piece of chicken. Filed some updates. Greg stiffened. Danny sipped her wine too fast. I let the silence stretch just long enough to catch. Then I stood and retrieved the stack of envelopes from the buffet, 6 in total, cream-colored, labeled in my tidy, looping handwriting: mortgage, education expenses, medical bills, household services, utilities. Final note: I placed one in front of each adult. The last one I slid under my own plate. Danny looked at hers like it might explode. Greg just stared at the table. "These," I said, "are records of everything I've paid for over the last 8 years. Itemized. With interest calculated at the average annual rate of inflation." I paused. "Because if you're going to treat me like staff, I might as well invoice you like one." Danny's mouth fell open. Greg's hands clenched. The kids looked confused, too young to grasp what was happening, but old enough to feel the temperature drop. "I don't understand," Danny said, voice brittle. "You don't have to," I replied. "You just have to read." And Pay Greg opened his envelope. I watched his eyes widen. "I can't pay this," he whispered. "That's not my problem," I said. Danny leaned forward, voice rising. "This is insane. You're tearing the family apart. Over what? Some bills?" "No," I said. "Over being used. over being disrespected, over you handing me a dog collar for my birthday and thinking I'd stay on the leash. Her face darkened. It was a joke. I stood up. I've been your free childcare, your backup bank account, your in-house maid, your emergency contact, your silent partner. I have erased myself daily for the comfort of this household. And you called it love. Greg tried to interrupt. I raised a hand. I'm done. I walked to the coat closet, pulled out my bag, already packed, just a small leather duffel. Enough for a few days. Danny stood. Wait, what are you doing? Leaving. To where? I turned calmly. You don't get to know. Greg followed me to the porch. Mom, be reasonable. You're overreacting. We can talk. I stepped into the evening air, cool and clean. The world beyond their porch light looked wide again. You had years to talk, I said, walking toward the waiting car. He raised his voice. You think you're teaching us a lesson? I looked back once. No, I'm teaching myself one. The Uber pulled away, their silhouettes still framed in the doorway, confused by the fact that I'd really done it, that I hadn't slammed doors or screamed or threatened. I'd just left. And the house was still standing, only this time I wasn't in it. The apartment was nothing special, at least on paper. 2 rooms, a galley kitchen, a view of a CVS parking lot. But it was mine. No echoes of someone else's children, no faint smell of sports equipment or burnt toast. Just quiet, clean, unclaimed quiet. I signed the lease under my full name, Helen Louise Thompson, and paid the deposit in 1 check. The leasing agent, a wiry young man with too much gel in his hair, smiled politely as he handed me the keys. You settling in from out of town? He asked. I smiled back. You could say that. I'm just finally moving into myself. The first week, I kept expecting something, regret, anxiety, even guilt. Instead, I slept. For the first time in years, I didn't wake to a barking dog or a child screaming for waffles. I made my own coffee, took slow walks, bought a ficus I named Gloria, and I didn't call them, not once. On Thursday, I met Diane at a library talk on late life estate restructuring. She was 73, sharp as glass, and wore orthopedic sandals like they were stilettos. We got to talking, then walking, then meeting for tea the next day. By week's end, I was sitting in the sunroom of what Diane and her friends jokingly called the Coven, a co-op of retired women who'd pooled resources to buy up units in a converted commercial building and turn it into a haven for women who got tired of being useful. Their living room looked like something out of a Scandinavian design catalog. Open shelving, warm wood, mismatched mugs. I loved it immediately. Diane introduced me to Francis, a former financial advisor who now taught workshops on how to uncouple your worth from your womb. Her words, not mine. We don't do selfless here, Francis said, pouring me a glass of cucumber water. We charge for our labor. We name our needs. We don't go quietly. It felt like being handed a key to a locked room in myself I didn't know was still bolted shut. Meanwhile, back in suburbia, Greg sent texts like flares. Hey, just checking in. Hope you're okay. Kids miss you. Can we talk? Danny's really upset. This is hard on everyone. I didn't reply. Then came the voicemail. Mom, he said, his voice clipped. This has gone far enough. You're hurting people. You've made your point. Come home and we'll work something out. I played it twice, not because I was considering it, but because I wanted to make sure I heard the word point. As if my life had been a PowerPoint presentation, a gesture, an inconvenience wrapped in meaning. No thank you. That weekend, I attended my first co-op meeting. Diane nominated me for a temporary seat on their finance committee. I accepted. We discussed rent increases, zoning loopholes, long-term passive income. Francis suggested converting 2 empty units into short-term rentals for remote workers. We could cover our maintenance fees for the year, she said, or better yet, donate half to shelters for women, leaving domestic care roles. It was brilliant. It was mine now, too. Later, over pie, Diane asked if I was afraid of retaliation from my son. Legal, financial, emotional, he'll try everything, she said. They always do when they lose their free labor. I nodded. I already updated everything: trusts, beneficiaries, healthcare directives. He doesn't even know who my lawyer is. She raised her glass. To invisibility becoming power. The next day, I got a letter. Official looking, postmarked from a law firm Greg didn't have the brains to choose himself. No, this reeked of Danny. Inside was a request for reconciliation, paired with a list of conditions under which we would feel comfortable resuming a relationship. It included a clause that I cease all defamatory statements about the family, return borrowed funds, and agree to limited supervised visits with the kids. Supervised, like I was unstable. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my tea. I faxed a copy to Clarissa, who called 20 minutes later and said, "This is a legal bluff," and a clumsy one we drafted a polite reply. Helen Thompson does not engage in coerced familial contracts. All further communications should be directed to counsel. Then I wrote a separate note, just for me, just to feel the pen in my hand. I am no longer the apology you expected me to be. And I meant every word. The first letter from the IRS arrived mid-October. Plain envelope, official seal. Just enough government beige to make your heart skip a beat, even when you know you've done nothing wrong. But I hadn't done nothing. Greg had. Or rather, he'd done plenty. Just none of it with a CPA's blessing. They'd failed to update their records after I removed myself from the mortgage, which meant their deduction claims were now under audit. And because they'd used my name and tax ID on several filings years ago without ever really asking, things got messy. Clarissa warned me this might happen. They used you as a financial firewall, she said. Now they'll learn what exposure feels like. I didn't call them, let the letters talk. Instead, I prepared for the seminar. Francis had asked me to speak at our co-op's annual Women and Wealth event, a half-day program for women over 65 reclaiming financial agency. The audience would be small, local, but the idea of telling my story with a microphone still made my palms sweat. I wrote it out carefully. No sob stories, no pleas, just facts. I was a mother, then a widow, then a grandma, then a resource. Somewhere along the way, they stopped asking what I wanted and started assuming I had nothing left to want. People listened. They nodded. One woman cried. Afterward, a journalist from a small local station asked if I'd be willing to talk on camera. "We're doing a piece on economic elder abuse," she said. "You'd be the perfect voice." I told her I'd think about it. The next week, Greg lost his job. Not because of me, not directly. But the article had gone semi-viral online, picked up by a few elder law blogs, reshared on financial forums, and Greg's company had compliance standards, PR concerns, a reputation to protect. Danny left a voicemail, no greeting, no pleasantries. I hope you're proud of yourself. I didn't return it. Instead, I cleaned out the last of my old storage unit, sold a few things, and donated the rest. I didn't need the wedding china or Greg's baby shoes. I'd already spent a lifetime preserving things that weren't mine to carry. Then came the card. It arrived without warning, no return address, childish handwriting on the front. Inside, a drawing, crayon lines, me with a crown, a speech bubble that said, "You're the queen." It was from my youngest grandson. No note from the parents, just the drawing. I stared at it for a long time, my fingers brushing over the rough wax strokes. I didn't cry. I'd done my crying in silence long before any of this began. What I felt was something quieter, a pulse of ache and clarity. I placed the card in a file labeled New Family and tucked it away in my desk. That night, as the sun went down over the city, Diane asked me, "Do you ever miss it?" The house, the noise. I took a sip of wine, thought for a moment. "No," I said, "I miss who I used to be inside it. But that version of me died the day they thought it was funny to put me on a leash." She nodded. "You think they'll ever apologize?" "Maybe, when they run out of people to blame." We sat in silence for a while, the hum of the street below soft and distant. Then she asked, "So what's next for you?" I smiled. Freedom. Not loud, not flashy, just earned, and utterly mine.